Okay, so I thought today I'd just talk a little bit about, we were talking before about conceptual and non-conceptual, and I'd relate this a little bit to maybe thought training and, other aspects of our communication with others. So often in our relationships with people, what we get is, sensorially, we hear their voice, we see the color, shape of their face. And in NVC, nonviolent communication language, if you were going to describe the situation, that's what you would describe as the bare sensory perception. Okay? But as we've seen in our Dharma practice, and also as we've seen in our NVC study, we don't leave it with the bare perception. We create a story about what all that sensory data means. Okay? And so, that story creating gets us into a lot of trouble. And all that story creating is our conceptualizations. Okay? It's conceptual consciousness. And then it's conceptualizations, which really has a kind of negative implication, okay? Because we hear the voice in a certain way, and then we go, that means they're mad at me. That means they don't like me. That means they think I'm stupid. Is any of that information in the sound of somebody's voice? No. The raw sense data is just the sound of the voice. That's what our auditory consciousness is hearing. All that other stuff is conception going on in our mental consciousness. It is not present there in the person's voice. But you see, we, can't often we can't discriminate between our sense consciousness and our mental consciousness. They're actually quite obviously different when you stop and think about it. But in our day-to-day interactions, we aren't aware of that. And we think that in their voice, their voice is saying, I can't stand you, and you're stupid, and what you're saying is ridiculous, and go away, and none of that is there. So in NVC, what we're trying to do when we're just describing the sense data of the experience is to go back to, what our eyes were seeing, what our ears were hearing, and take the mental conceptual consciousness out of the picture. Okay? And we've seen in our NVC studies how hard that is to do. Yeah? How hard it is, because we're so convinced that our concepts are externally existent inside the object, and they aren't. So, this is one thing that we have to be really aware of and practice with. Yeah. Then also, what we see, let's say when we're doing thought training practice, let's take an example. Somebody criticizes us. Right? And so again, it's just the sound of the voice and whatever, but we get angry in response to it because we've made up this story. They think I'm stupid and it's unfair that they say this to me and I didn't make this mistake and they made it and now they're blaming me and da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, and then we get really carried away with our story, which we use to rationalize our anger. Okay, when we're doing thought training practice, we're replacing that false conceptualization with an accurate Dharma concept or Dharma understanding of what's actually happening. In other words, why did I get criticized? Because in the past, I've criticized others, so I've created the karma, some kind of negative karma, and so this event that's happening to me is nothing more than a ripening of my own karma. So that understanding is a conceptual understanding, but it's a correct conception, and when we practice it in thought training, then what it does is it alleviates our anger, because we see that that's a correct understanding of the situation, whereas they think I'm this and they're taking advantage and therefore I should act this way and that way, is totally misconception. Okay? Yeah? So in, some of our Buddhist practice, what we are doing is we're replacing an incorrect conception with a correct one, and that in doing so, it really helps us emotionally to relieve our emotional involvement in the thing. In the same way, when we're very, they say for sexual attachment, to think about the ugly aspect of the object, okay? Well, that's because our mind usually conceptualizes the raw data of the color and shape of somebody's body and, makes this whole story about it, which is not there in the raw visual data that we're getting. That beauty, that attraction, that desirability, nothing of that is there in the color of shape. That's all coming from our conceptual mental consciousness. Okay? And so then, to remedy that, we replace it with a different understanding, looking at the same object and seeing that actually it's not so attractive after all, that it's basically a pee and poo factory, with a little bit of sweat and earwax and eye stuff coming out as well, But it's nothing that attractive that we have to get so turned on and about and, crazy about. Okay? So there, too, we're replacing an incorrect conceptualization with a correct conceptual understanding of the conventional nature of the object. Okay? So this, I just thought I would relate some of this to what we're doing in our practice and also what we're doing in NVC. Okay?